In today's cybersecurity landscape, identity is one of the most targeted attack surfaces. One of the most common attack methods is the use of legacy authentication protocols. These older methods do not support modern security controls like multi-factor authentication, and they are frequently abused in account compromise attacks. Imagine a user signing in using an outdated email client that only supports basic authentication. No MFA prompt. No conditional checks. Just a simple username and password request. This is exactly the type of weakness attackers exploit in Microsoft 365 environments. To solve this, Microsoft recommends blocking legacy authentication using Microsoft Entra Conditional Access. In this video, we will walk through a real-world enterprise security configuration, how to identify and block legacy authentication step by step using conditional access. Legacy authentication refers to older authentication protocols that do not support modern security standards. These include basic authentication methods used by older email clients, scripts, and legacy applications. The key problem is simple. These methods do not support modern identity protection features like multi-factor authentication or device compliance checks. In Microsoft Entra ID, legacy authentication often appears in sign-in logs as attempts using older client protocols. From a security perspective, this is a major risk because if credentials are stolen, attackers can sign in without being challenged by additional security controls. Microsoft strongly recommends disabling legacy authentication because it significantly reduces the attack surface. In real-world environments, legacy authentication is one of the most common entry points for password spray and credential stuffing attacks. Even if a password is strong, legacy authentication bypasses modern protections, making accounts vulnerable. By blocking legacy authentication, we ensure that only modern authentication flows are allowed, which support multi-factor authentication and conditional access policies. This is a standard hardening step in enterprise Microsoft 365 security deployments. Now let's implement the solution. We start by opening the Microsoft Entra Admin Center. From the left navigation panel, go to Microsoft Entra ID. Under Conditional Access, navigate to Policies. This is where we create and manage access control rules for users, applications, and sign-in conditions. Click on New Policy to create a new conditional access rule. We begin by naming the policy clearly, CA, Block Legacy Authentication. Under Assignments, select Users. In a production environment, you may apply this to all users or a specific security group, depending on rollout strategy. Next, go to Cloud Apps or Actions. Here, select all cloud apps to ensure full coverage across all services. This ensures that legacy authentication is blocked regardless of which application is being accessed. Now we configure the critical condition. Under Conditions, select Client Apps. This is the most important configuration step for blocking legacy authentication. First, we toggle Configure to Yes. Then we need to carefully select only legacy authentication clients. We uncheck modern authentication clients, which includes browser and mobile apps and desktop clients. We check Exchange Active Sync clients. This covers older Exchange protocols that use basic authentication. We also check other clients. This covers protocols like POP3, IMAP, and SMTP, which are the most common legacy authentication methods. By selecting only these legacy client types, our policy will specifically target and detect sign-in attempts using outdated authentication protocols. In the sign-in logs, we can filter by client app to identify which users and applications are still using legacy authentication before enforcing the block. Now go to Access Controls. Under Grant, select Block Access. This is the enforcement step that prevents legacy authentication completely. Once enabled, any attempt using legacy authentication will be denied immediately. Before enabling this policy, we must follow a critical best practice. We must exclude break glass accounts, also known as emergency access accounts. These accounts are used for administrative recovery in case of misconfiguration or authentication failures. Excluding them ensures that administrators always retain access to the tenant in emergency situations. This is a standard Microsoft security recommendation for production environments. Before enforcing the policy, Microsoft recommends testing in report-only mode. Report-only mode allows administrators to evaluate the impact of the policy without blocking users. We can also use the what-if tool inside conditional access to simulate sign-in scenarios. For example, we can test a normal user sign-in using a legacy authentication client. The result shows our policy would apply, and the reason is that the client app condition matched legacy authentication clients. We can also test a break glass account. As expected, the policy does not apply, and the reason shown is that the user is excluded from the policy scope. This validation step is essential before enabling enforcement. Once testing is complete and validation is successful, we can enable the policy. We switch the policy from report-only mode to on. At this point, legacy authentication attempts will be actively blocked across the environment. Users will be required to use modern authentication methods that support multi-factor authentication and conditional access. Blocking legacy authentication is one of the most important security hardening steps in Microsoft 365 environments. It significantly reduces the risk of account compromise and ensures that only secure authentication methods are used. This is a key skill for SOC analysts, Microsoft administrators, and cybersecurity professionals.